sort of just actually arise during the course of the study. A lot of what is taking place, which Peri Lee will present. I'm not trying to like spoil the show, but some of these things were not known prior to taking on this study. And so this study definitely is the result of 3 intense, challenging years, but ultimately I hope it's been very rewarding. And I'm really excited that we'll be able to hear all of the things, well, many of the things, not all of the things certainly, but many of the things that Peri Lee has revealed about this special place. So with that, I'd like to introduce Peri Lee, and they'll give their presentation on the flora of the Silver Peak Range.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out today. As Naomi said, I've been working in the Silver Peak Range for almost 3 years now, and I'm really excited to share my research with all of y'all. This place is not only incredibly unique, but it means a lot to me, and I hope that all of you will have the chance to visit this amazing place for yourself one day. So before we dive into this study, I'd like to provide a little background on what a flora or a floristic inventory is for folks unfamiliar with this type of research. So floristic inventories are often colloquially called floras. They're systematic inventories based on vouchered collections that provide a checklist of species present in an area. This provides baseline biological data that can assist future research. They can also provide important data for plant conservation by identifying species in areas of conservation concern. And this can also assist with rare species mapping. And all of this can go on to proactively reduce conflict between development and conservation, or at the very least, provide an early alert for potential conservation conflicts. So what is a vouchered collection? Researchers like myself will go into the field and collect specimens of live plants, press and dry them, and then glue them to archival paper to be stored in an herbarium, which is essentially a library of dead pressed plants. And then just to give even more context for some of our audience, plant conservation and documentation of plants is important because plants often are deprioritized, right? They don't have cute eyes that look back at us like some of the showy fauna do. But plants are the basis of terrestrial ecosystems, which provide oxygen, food, habitat, shelter, and support all life on Earth. This biodiversity increases resilience to climate change and just generally improves our quality of life, the quality of life for wildlife, et cetera. And the failure on our part to protect important plant species can collapse ecosystems. And so I had several objectives when I began this study. So I wanted to voucher and systematically catalog the vascular and non-vascular flora of a place in critical need of a conservation effort. I wanted to then produce an annotated checklist, assess current threats to the flora, identify areas that hold significance for plant diversity, document occurrences of sensitive, rare, threatened, or endangered species, and also occurrences of non-native taxa, and provide opportunities to the next generation of botanists. And I really wanted to prioritize non-traditional backgrounds in order to increase accessibility of this type of research, which I think is really important and only gets better with more diverse perspectives. And so before we talk about the Silver Peak Range specifically, we should talk about Nevada and about botanical black holes. So this map shows herbarium specimen density with dark green representing more collections and pale to white representing less collections. As you can see, Nevada is what we call a botanical black hole, especially when compared to its heavily botanized neighbor next door, California. An important mention, this map was made in 2014, so it is 10 years old, and was created before the University of Nevada, Reno and the Niles Herbaria were online, so it's not up to date. And there have been huge collection pushes over the past several decades, and there's even a state checklist in publication at the moment. However, Nevada is still in need of botanical documentation and is often referred to as the last botanical frontier. So, where is the Silver Peak Range? The Silver Peak Range is in western Nevada, in Nevada's least populated county, Esmeralda. It's the ancestral and unceded homelands of the Western Shoshone people and holds deep cultural significance to the Northern Paiute, Timbisha Shoshone, and Eastern Mono people as well. The study area that I selected is about 450 square miles, and that includes a 50 square mile wilderness study area that's managed by the BLM. And it's about 30 miles as the crow flies from Bishop and about 50 miles as the crow flies from Tonopah. Here we can see the general topography of the mountains and surrounding valleys that also make up the study site, with Fish Lake Valley to the west, Clayton Valley to the east. The study site also ranges in elevation from about 4,260 feet in the lowest part and goes all the way up to 9,451 feet in elevation. The climate of the region is very arid. So it has typically very low precipitation. It's a desert mountain range in a double rain shadow of both the White Mountains of California and the Sierra Nevada of California. So the winter lows in the mountains is around 0 degrees Fahrenheit. Summer highs getting up into the high 70s, sometimes low 80s. They usually get about 16 inches of average precipitation annually. And in the valleys, the winter lows are a little milder. They're around 16 degrees Fahrenheit, but the summer highs can go upwards of 100 degrees. I think currently it's 105 right now, very hot there. And only about 4.5 inches of rain occur in the valley annually. And this is an image from the new fire tower installed on Silver Peak. And so you can see it gets very snowy winters, lots of snow, very chilly, very cold up there, very beautiful. And so 2022 was a historic drought year. And so the 2 years of the study represented both drought years and historic precipitation years. 2022 was not only a drought year, but part of a prolonged period of drought, which ended in 2023. And then that year saw historic precipitation, and we received around 300% more than had ever annually been recorded. So this brought cooler temperatures for longer into the 2023 season and extended the growing period. And so historically, Esmeralda County was once a cooler, wetter, gentler, and more music climate than the Western Nevada we know today. We know this because fossil records show plants such as oaks, junipers, manzanitas, ferns, and aquatic plants living throughout the region. The valley saw more runoff from the mountains, and ancient perennial pluvial lakes cooled the region due to the lake effect. There were 2 ancient lakes in the region, Lake Columbus Rennie, which today is the Columbus Salt Marsh and the Fish Lake Valley, and Lake Tonopah, which is the Clayton Valley and the Big Smoky Valley today. At their deepest times, these lakes were around 230 feet above the salt-encrusted dry lake beds found in the valley floors today. So the geology of the Silver Peak Range is stunning and complex. It's hard to miss it if you visit these rainbow vistas, the stripes, the wind caves. The range itself lies within the Greater Basin and Range Geomorphic Province, which is a series of north to south trending uplifted mountains and dropped valleys. The Silver Peak Range is also within the Walker Lane, which is the most actively extending region of the Western Basin and Range province, and generally speaking, separates the granitic Sierra Nevada from the rest of the Basin and Range province. The Fish Lake Valley is also the single most active earthquake fault in the region, accounting for 50% of the regional extension across this area of the Western Basin and Range. Although it is part of the Basin and Range Geomorphic Province, the local topography itself is controlled by the Silver Peak caldera. So the Silver Peak Range experienced volcanic activity for about 1 million years, between 6 and 4.8 million years ago. And there were 2 major volcanic eras or explosions in the Silver Peak Range that really went on to shape the topography of the region. So in the early Miocene, there was a volcanic era that occurred before Basin and Range faulting began. And this involved voluminous rhyolitic ash explosions and created a huge elliptical caldera that is a very prominent caldera in the range today. Then in the Middle Miocene, typical Basin and Range faulting begins, again, dropping the valleys lower, rising the mountains higher. And then in the late Miocene to Pliocene volcanic era, different kinds of ash, so a feldspar-based ash flows and lava begin to erupt above ground. And below ground, magma is partially melting and mixing with a different kind of magma and undergoing fractional crystallization, which is when crystals separate out from the magma. And so all of this present-day topography was established by the late Pliocene, which is about 2.5 million years ago. And then weathering and erosion has created some of the really interesting landforms that we see in the valley today, and it's why the Silver Peak Range looks so cool. And so if everybody would just memorize this slide, I'll pass out the test in about 5 minutes. But so this is just to say that the diverse geology leads to the diverse floristic composition. So parent materials decompose into diverse soil substrates. There's some regional similarities of formations that are found in neighboring mountain ranges, such as the White Mountains or Death Valley. But locally, there's a lot of diverse minerals and rock types happening. And that, again, leads to the diverse flora that we see in the range today. And just to help you visualize what all those words look like in real life, this is satellite imagery from Google Earth. It hasn't been photoshopped or edited. I'm like not very good with that kind of stuff. But so this is what it actually looks like on the ground. So it's very colorful, it shifts very rapidly, and so we see rapid shifting of floristic communities. All of this diverse geology, the large elevational range from 4,400 feet to 9,450 feet, and the fact that it's at the transition of the Great Basin and Mojave Desert leads to the really unique flora found in the Silver Peak Range today. This flora is also influenced by the White Mountains, the Sierra Nevada, and Death Valley, which all neighbor nearby. This creates a wide array of habitats that we will go into in more depth soon, but we'll just do a whirlwind tour. We have dramatic canyons and cliffs. We have alkali wetlands and painted hills. We have sand dunes and riparian areas. And so these are just some of the very niche habitats that lend to high biodiversity in the range. And this creates habitat for tons of wildlife. So as amateur birders, we documented around 60 species of birds, more than 15 species of snakes and lizards, 2 species of fish, and endless list of showy megafauna in the area as well. And I'm sure a seasoned birder could probably double that list easy, as it is a hotspot. The area even has endemic wildlife species that are found nowhere else on Earth, including 3 undescribed scorpions, 2 in the Clayton Valley and 1 in Fish Lake Valley. There's also an undescribed toad thought to be distinct and endemic to the Fish Lake Valley toad. There's also a fish called the Fish Lake Tui Chub that lives in 1 pond in the whole Fish Lake Valley. And there is a spring snail, the Fish Lake Valley purge, which was thought to be extinct until recently when it was rediscovered. So that was really exciting for biologists to find out that the snail was no longer extinct. All right, everybody, buckle up. We're going on a floristic tour of the Silver Peak Range. We'll start in the lowest elevations with the playas and the salt marshes. So these are groundwater dependent ecosystems found around 4,600 to 4,800 feet in elevation. You find them in the Fish Lake Valley primarily, but they were historically present in the Clayton Valley as well, but they're now extirpated. They usually receive winter precipitation and flood in the winters and springs, forming seasonal lakes that evaporate and dry during the summer. But they also have groundwater that is pulled up through capillary action and evaporation, and this accumulates minerals and salt crusts on the surface. So you can see this plant, Astragalus lentigienosus sesquimetralis, growing in the salt crusts of the salt marsh. And then, yeah, these salty, crusty, alkaline habitats house lots of interesting diversity. And they're typically dominated by dense stands of Discus saccata, the saltgrass, and intermittent stands of Eleochorus species. Here we can see some of the common species and the seasonally flooded lake of Fish Lake Valley. So Cleomella brevites, the short-stalked stinkweed. Discus saccata, as I mentioned, is a very dominant species in these salt marshes, and Zeltnera nevadensis. Oops. We also have such cuties as Chloropyron tecopense and Primula pauciflora, and these are kind of unusual plants. They grow very specifically in the salt marshes. And in the background, we have a picture of that one spring where the one fish lives. And then slightly more upland, we have a little bit more, we have slightly larger species such as the shrub Ericameria albida, Cercia mohavense, and Ivesea kingii, variety kingii. Next, going up in elevation, we have both active and stabilized sand dune communities in the range. So these are found between 4,500 and 5,100 feet. They're primarily inhabited by species adapted to shifting substrates such as sand. And we have a few kinds of sand habitats in the range. We have small dunes with sparse vegetation. We also have partially stabilized dunes, and these tend to form hummocks. And then we also have, not in the study site, but directly adjacent to, and definitely worth mentioning because they're amazing, large and migrating dunes that are sparsely vegetated. And so this is kind of an example of a partially stabilized dune. And we get some species such as Tetrademia axillaris that grows in the stabilized areas, and Astragalus sabuonum that grows in the sandy areas near the vegetation. We also have plants such as Astragalus geyeri, variety geyeri, a rare milk vetch only found in some of these sandy habitats. Sand ricegrass, Areochoma hyemenoides, which is a dominant bunch grass found in sandy areas. And we also have Orchides nevadensis, which is a rare plant found in the sand dunes on the California-Nevada borderlands areas. And one of my favorite little special dune tomatoes. It's very great. We also have some other showy perennials, such as the Chaetodelpha wheeleri, Carsonia sparsiflora, and the rusty lupin, Lupinus pusillus variety intermontanus. So we'll go a little bit higher in elevation now, hiking up the hill. And this is an area, the saltbrush scrub communities, is highly variable associated species. We typically find this community between 5,000 and 6,400 feet in the range. And it's characterized by sparse to moderately dense stands of small shrubs, lots of perennial bunch grasses, and large open spaces between plants. The soils here tend to be shallow and poorly developed and fairly alkaline and salty, but they support lots of cryptobiotic crust communities and desert pavement communities. And then some of these shrubs that are found in the range, so these are some of the saltbush diversity found in the range, and then a lot of other shrubs that co-occur here as well. And so this is an example of some of the typical saltbrush scrub communities. So we have lots of annual wildflowers, such as Linanthus campanuatus and Monoptilum billetiforme. And then we have some perennials, such as the Onicera primavera. So you can see that large open space between plants, scattered with lots of gravelly substrates and low-lying shrubs. The saltbush scrub community also has some other shrubs such as Straussea ambigua, variety rosaceae, Hycastic leaf shocklei, which is fairly uncommon but pretty abundant in the Silver Peak range, and then Oreocaria hoffmanii, the White Mountains cat's eye, which is a species shared with the White Mountains. The saltbush community is, again, fairly diverse, but home to some really interesting endemics, such as Mentzelia candelariae, which is Esmeralda County endemic Mentzelia, or blazing star. And then some more common shrubs, such as Thorathamus polydenius and the cactus Cylindroprintia echinocarpa. We'll move a little higher up in elevation now. So this is the Mojave Great Basin Mixed Shrub Transition Zone. So this is found both in the transition zone between the Mojave Desert and the Great Basin Desert, usually between 5,500 feet and 7,500 feet. So the Mojave influence in the Silver Peak range generally occurs at a lower elevation towards the southern and eastern edges of the range, while the Great Basin influence generally is at slightly higher elevations in the western and central parts of the range. Soils tend to be fine in texture, ranging from clays and silts to loams with abundant cryptobiotic crusts as well here. And it's dominated by a broad variety of shrubs, and a lot of them are shared with the saltbush scrub community. So some of these are like Gilia cana, which is a showy little gilia, lots of cactus diversity. This is a very beautiful showy one, Echinoceras engelmannii. And then this shrub, Lepidospartum latticequamum, which is ubiquitous with the region. And when we look at the Mojave influence in the area, we can tell it's more of a Mojave desert influence when we see species such as Joshua trees seen in the background, creosote, Laurea tridentata, Gray spinosa, and Lithium andersonii are pretty classically found in the Mojave desert. While some other shrubs classically found or more Great Basin aligned are Ephedra nevadensis, Lithium shocklei, Oreocaria confertiflora, Sarcobates Bailey, and Perseus sansburyana. Some of the special soils that occur in these regions are carbonate soils and outcroppings. And so these are calcium and or magnesium-rich soil deposits, and they occur in the silicites as dolostone and limestone in both cliff form and just soil outcropping, rock outcroppings and soil patches. And so this parent material often results in unique vegetation and exerts strong selection in terms of regional flora and supports narrowly endemic species. Plants in these niche soils tend to be pretty spatially isolated. So these plants, while very locally common within the carbonate outcroppings, are pretty scattered throughout the range, and it's not a common community to find. Some of the common carbonate outcropping plants are Shockley's buckwheat, Eriogonum shocklei, the Nevada sunray, and Coleopsis nudicalis, variety nudicalis, the mat rock spirea, Petrophytum cespitosum, and the rarely encountered Erythranthe calcicola, limestone monkey flower, which came up in abundance during the wet year, but wasn't observed a single time during the drought year. Carbonate outcroppings also host plants such as Eriogonum huermanii and Tricardia watsonii, some very precious shrubs and forbs found in the region, and those are the flowers of the buckwheat in the corner. And you can see these carbonate outcroppings are very striking. It's like white soil, very bright, especially when you've been outside and the sun's reflecting on it. These very intense outcroppings, but they support these amazing diversity of plants, such as Hymenocapis filifolius, Calanthus glaucus, and Cecilius saxicola. Another niche community found in this elevational belt is the cliffs and canyons communities. So they're found around 5,000 to 8,000 feet. They're not restricted to that elevation. This is just where they're found in the Silver Peak range. They tend to be really floristically diverse and occur across any elevation. So these plants are found on barren to sparsely vegetated cliffs, rock cracks, canyons, badlands, and scree slopes. And they live in these places because precipitation is channeled through those cracks between and around boulders and through the dry falls, and just generally through other little pockets in the rocks where like seeds can find a place and accumulate water to grow. And these are usually pretty harsh soil properties and harsh growing conditions. But of note is the high lichen diversity in these areas. And so some of the plants that we found hiking through the cliffs and canyons, Senestus graniticus, the granite serpent weed, Ivesea arizonica, yellow papusia, and Erigeron breweri, variety Pophrisitis, the boulder daisy. And it's really interesting to be hiking through these harsh conditions, but finding all these plants clinging on and finding a way. Some other canyons had more special properties, such as limestone cliffs. Here we got some rare plants such as Agaricosma jonesii, which is a fern that only grows in limestone in the cracks and cliffs. And then two of the plants we mentioned earlier with the carbonate outcroppings and limestone outcroppings, Petrophytum cespitosum and Eriogonum huermanii, are also pretty aligned to the carbonate outcroppings. And then there's other plants that just generally love the cliffs, Heuchera rubescens, found pretty ubiquitously through the cliffs and canyon region. Cliffs and canyons also provide refuge from the heat of the study area. And so while it's pretty hot and dry and harsh, a lot of moisture and shade can happen within these canyon regions. So some plants such as Ivesea bailey, variety setosa, is known for further north parts of Nevada, but it's found here likely because the canyons provide a cooler refuge. The same with Angelica linear-loba, which is it's found abundantly in the Sierra Nevada, and it's only known in Nevada for the White Mountains, but is also found in the Silver Peak range in these canyons and protected areas. And then there's some other more common in the study site, but less common around, the Halimolobos yageri and the Chamaebuteria millefolium, also taking refuge in the shady canyons. All right, another special habitat in the range is the mid-elevation riparian zones. So these are found between 5,400 and 7,800 feet in elevation. They're along mid-elevation to high elevation perennial creeks and springs and seeps. And so because these wet soils are always damp, they're always more moist, they're a little more productive, and they make habitat where only specific taxa can be found in the range. This produces also a thick perennial and annual forb cover just because there's more resources in this area. And it also is where we found the highest diversity of non-native species. So we see plants such as Erythranthe guttata growing in the wetlands and Hesperochiron nanus, the meadow stars, very beautiful little ground cover. And I used to like to joke that this was the tallest peak or the tallest waterfall in the Silver Peak range, standing at a majestic 3.5 feet tall. But we found a taller waterfall, so I don't have any more jokes. And so here's some of the species that could be found at the mid-elevation riparian zones. So we have some pretty sensitive taxa, such as the Epipactis gigantea, which is the stream orchid. And then just some other special plants, the Cystopteris fragilis. Ferns are fairly uncommon in the range, so the springs really helped harbor some of the ferns. Myanthemum stellatum, the starflower lily of the valley, and Clematis ligustifolia, which kind of grows over everything at the springs. Unfortunately, although there's over 55 springs in the range, most of the springs have been altered or demolished to provide cattle troughs for livestock. And so you can see at the bottom, this is a spring area that has been fully diverted and contained to be a cattle trough. And then above, you can see someone working at a spring that has been fully bulldozed. So that is all uplifted earth, and there's barbed wire all around the spring. And so that spring has been functionally completely altered. Here's some other common species found around the riparian areas: the Aquilegia shocklei, Juncus balticus, Asclepias fascicularis, and Potentilla biennis. So next, we're still hiking up the hill. Got a little distracted with those cool niche habitats, but still got some elevation to climb. We arrive in the sagebrush steppe and shrubland communities. And so there's a lot of different kinds of sagebrush communities, and they're fairly similar. They have varying degrees of herbaceous coverage and different species assemblages, and so that's how we kind of tell them apart. In the Silver Peak range, we find them between 6,400 or 6,000 feet to 9,400 feet. And we categorize them based on species composition and elevation. So the two main types of sagebrush we have are the dwarf sagebrush steppe, which occurs at higher elevations and is typically aligned with Artemisia arbuscula and Artemisia nova. And we also have tall sagebrush steppe, which is more aligned with Artemisia tridentata and is also co-dominated by the shrub Persia tridentata. And there's a lot of other species of shrubs interspersed throughout the sagebrush steppe as well. And so the dwarf sagebrush steppe and shrubland, as I said, dominated by Artemisia arbuscula and Artemisia nova. And these are small to moderately sized sagebrushes, and they occur in open to moderately dense canopies with herbaceous and graminoid coverage. They tend to be pretty xeric, rocky, alkaline soils, and there's a lot of abundant geophytes, such as Lomatium foniculaceum and Loesia rediviva variety minor. And these are all observed frequently at the mid to high elevation transition zones. So a lot of nova at the peaks and some arbuscula a little lower down and also at the peaks. The tall sagebrush steppe and shrubland has two main categories: the big sagebrush desert shrubland, which is dominated by Artemisia tridentata, variety tridentata. We typically find this at mid elevations between 6,500 and 7,500 feet. And in the study area was observed in all areas above the Atroplex scrub communities in the study site. And it's often interspersed with pinyon juniper woodlands. And then we also have the montane sagebrush steppe, which is dominated by Artemisia tridentata variety vassiana. We find this more at the subalpine elevation, starting around 8,500 feet. And it's typically characterized by a low shrub layer that's fairly open in canopy with an abundant, often dwarfed perennial herbaceous layer. And so here are some of the common species found in the area: Ephedra viridis, Pachyra multilobata, Astragalus calicosus, variety calicosus, and Calicortus kennedyi, variety munzii. And as you can see in this picture, the sagebrush and the pinyon tend to have blending zones where there's little pinyons appearing and sagebrushes. So there's no hard line between these communities. They all just kind of gently blend and share species with each other. Next, we'll go up in elevation to the pinyon juniper woodland. So we've hit the forests of the study site. And so this is the dominant vegetation in the mid-elevational belt in the Silver Peak range. It's found between 6,500 and 9,200 feet and characterized by open to moderately dense stands of Pinus monophylla, the pinyon pine, or Juniperus osteosperma, the Utah juniper. It forms open to dense shrub layers and sparse to moderately dense herbaceous layers are beneath the canopies. You can find this on dry, open slopes, plateaus, ridges, and mesas with shallow, rocky soils. And as I said, the understory of the forest can range from sparse or to be graminoid, grass-like species dominated. And it often shares a lot of species with the sagebrush community. In the Silver Peak range, Pinus monophylla is dominant, so juniper is a lot less common, but the Pinus monophylla there's huge forests of it. And so these are some of the common species we see. And you can see there's a pretty dense woodland, lots of cliffs, and the woodland continuing up to the peaks of the range. Some of the very dominant species include Symphoeocarpus longiflorus, which is the fragrant snowberry, Castanea cremosa, and the Juniperus osteosperma, the Utah juniper. Some other species we see in the pinyon juniper woodlands: Eriogonum umbulatum, variety nevadense, Cordylanthus kingii, variety helleri, which is a very cute little honey-parasitic Orbancaceae, Diplochus mephiticus, the skunky monkey flower, and the Inyo onion, Allium acherubens, variety cristatum. And this is a great picture to see the challenging terrain that was present in the Silver Peak range. We also get such cuties as the Fritillaria atripurpurea. Who doesn't love a spotted fritillary? Come on. Facilia valimorte, and Erythranthe rubella, the red stem monkey flower. And then finally, we arrive at the peaks at the high elevation bristlecone pine woodlands. So these occur at the highest elevations in the range, from around 9,200 feet to 9,400 feet. The bristlecone pines are found primarily on north-facing drainages and mountain slopes. And while we were up there, we observed large stands of dead trees, of dead bristlecones along the peaks. And so this indicates that those stands used to be much larger at one point in time. They typically occur in areas with thin soils between the boulder outcrops. And then in general, bristlecone pines can grow up to around 11,000 feet in elevation. So these occur at a relatively low elevation compared to their broader distribution. And because of this, the herbaceous species composition around these bristlecones are more influenced by pinyon juniper woodland rather than by the typical bristlecone pine forest alliances. And so we can see some of the species co-occurring with the bristlecone pines: Lupinus argenteus, the silvery lupin; Townsendia scapigera, a very low-lying ground daisy, the Nevada ground daisy; and Philadelphus microphyllus, the little leaf mock orange. We also get some low-lying plants, such as the Phlox hoodii, the spiny phlox, Linanthus pungens, Ipomopsis congesta, variety congesta, and Aramogony kingii. We get some very beautiful grasses, such as Melica stricta, and some sharp little shrubs, Rhinotropsis intermontana, very, very cute, spiky one. And at the highest elevations, we get oceans of perennial wildflowers, such as Hymenopsis cooperi, or annuals, and Eriogonum rosense, very cute little buckwheat. And yeah, so the peaks, you can see the whites in the background and just fields and fields of wildflowers up above 9,400 feet. So for this study, I also collected bryophytes, and I photo documented lichens and fungi. I think that for a floristic study, you should, a full picture is including all plants present, and mosses are also plants, even though they're very tiny. People like to overlook them. They provide a full floristic picture when we include them in the flora. And then I photo documented the lichen and the mushrooms, the fungi found in the area. As we all know, those are not plants. So we didn't collect them, but hopefully one day a lichen researcher will be so happy to see these photos. And so we can't talk about the flora without talking about the land use history and the impacts that humans have had on this area. So no floristic composition is without the influence of humans. People have always tended the land and moved through it, and it has always moved through them. So there's been a long history of land use change in this region. When the first settlers arrived, the first accounts in the early 1800s, there were about 3,000 Shoshone people living in the Fish Lake Valley. And for context, there's 729 people in all of Esmeralda County today, and about 30 Shoshone people in the Fish Lake Valley today. So pre-contact, Cottonwood Creek, which is a perennial creek that still comes out of the mountains today, but stops in Oasis. Cottonwood Creek flowed from the south through the valley to form an extensive wetland and stream system. There were agricultural systems in place, with systems of irrigation and reciprocal ways of land tending. Settler agriculture and ranching began in the mid to late 1800s to account for the miners moving to the area, so they had more people to feed. So cattle moved in, alfalfa moved in, and water was rerouted to the alfalfa farms. So you can see this line of alfalfa farms following the historic flow of water that is now today dry. Genocide occurred in the region. As you can see, 3,000 people going to about 30 is a pretty significant decrease. When settlers arrived, they shot the herd animals, often from trains, and this reduced food sources for people. They also brought disease and general violence to the area. And so colonization has altered the floristic composition and local ecology, and also decimated local culture. In the Clayton Valley, where Silver Peak is, accounts say it was first occupied by indigenous people when the first settler accounts were recorded in the 1850s. And these accounts talk of a large perennial spring in the town that is now Silver Peak, surrounding hot springs and salt marshes and wetlands. These have reportedly dried through groundwater overdraw. Visiting these springs, the large perennial spring in Silver Peak is now the city pool, and the rest of the springs are dry. There used to be a seasonal lake in this area that was large enough to support boat races. I think there was an article from 1905 announcing the 4th of July boat race in Silver Peak. And then in the 1970s, lithium evaporation ponds were developed where the salt marshes were. And this has altered area hydrology. And today, this lithium evaporation operation is the only active lithium mine in the United States. So I really like this quote from the 1866 issue of the American Journal of Mining, because I believe it set the tone for the future of the range to come. It appears that when the good genii of the mines were depositing their abundant stores of the precious metals in the hills of Nevada, they came to the borders of the Valley of Death, and although having silver enough to enrich the mountains of a continent, built the protuberance of Silver Peak and hid all their treasures beneath. A fateful statement. And so mining has been occurring in the area since the mid to late 1800s. It's had a huge impact on the local environment, local ecology. It's one of the oldest mining districts in Nevada. There was a massive rush to mine beginning in the late 1800s, and this physically disturbed and altered the landscape. Not only did it physically remove landscape and dig up places, it exposed toxic heavy metals, altered hydrology through the diversion of springs. It also left tailing piles around, which release acid and minerals, and it can also contaminate ground and surface waters. And the Silver Peak Range, the old mining process uses cyanide leaching process, which is still used at Mineral Ridge today, one of the mines in operation. And this can kill wildlife, primarily migratory birds, and also contaminate surrounding soils and waters with arsenic and mercury, especially some of the historic operations before regulations were in place. And so I can't talk more about the flora of the Silver Peak Range until we talk about contemporary conservation issues in the range. And so these issues, conservation issues are quite extensive, ranging from mining and mineral extraction, solar development, grazing, geothermal energy, non-native species, and climate change. And so the most widely known issue in the range, and one of the most pressing conservation issues in the range, is the hard rock mining occurring, or in proposal. There is one mine in current operation today, Mineral Ridge, but the biggest one is the Ioneer Rhyolite Ridge project. And so the project boundaries of this mine will include the entire global range of a rare endemic species, Eriogonum temii, which is critically imperiled and federally endangered and restricted to just 10 acres globally. So the draft EIS statement was released this spring, environmental impact statement, and the comment period closed in June 2024. Construction of this mine will destroy about 196 acres of the 910-acre critical habitat area, and creation of a 200-acre industrial facility next to the quarry is an industrial processing plant. And to create this, they'll have to cut new roads with 150-ton trucks traveling through the area up to 1,050 times daily. And just to picture it, like a 150-ton truck isn't like that Dodge Ram that's down the street. It is like a Star Wars size earth mover. Like they're big, big trucks. Massive quantities of dust and nitrogen deposition will occur. And this will not only impact the habitat, but the pollinators as well in this area. Water for this project is proposed to be drawn from the Fish Lake Valley, where the groundwater supply is already 172% appropriated. And this would compromise all of that beautiful groundwater-dependent biodiversity in the salt marshes that we talked about earlier. And then just to see what this project, the mining project looks like. So the green here are Eriogonum temii populations. This is its whole global range, the only place in the whole world it occurs. And then this is going to be this huge, huge quarry, so a giant cliff directly next to the population. And then the other quarry infill right over here. And then this map doesn't show the industrialized processing areas, but these roads will go directly next to these populations. And so that will be very vulnerable to dust and likely just fully prohibit pollinators from reaching these plants. And also to mention of importance is that this place is historically very culturally significant. There's a cave called Cave Springs with rock art in it. Lots of artifacts found around the cave. And it's been expressed that it is a very sacred space for the Shoshone people. And there's also a cabin of historical settler significance in the area as well. And this is all directly next to the mining pit. Another type of hard mining occurring in the site is, or proposed to be occurring in the site, is salt marsh mining. So this is brine evaporation and proposed lithium extraction. This would lead to direct habitat loss and alteration of hydrological systems. Brine aquifer withdrawals irreversibly deplete the aquifer and they can collapse them. Habitat destruction and groundwater overdraw, as we know, threatens biodiversity. And in these salt marshes, like we talked about, there's some rare plants and animals, such as Astragalus lentiginosus variety fescometralis, which is a state-listed endangered species, and Chloropyron techopenses, seen here, which is under petition. It's being petitioned to get endangered species status at the moment. And also, this would impact where the fish lake tui chub lives. Remember, this is the fish that lives in one pond, only one pond on the whole planet. And then the endemic undescribed toad that lives in the valley. And even Esmeralda County Water Resource Plan discourages evaporative mining techniques in favor of more water efficient methods. And so you can see over here in this map, the blue and the orange are two different types of lithium claims, but the little black dots are where chloropyrrole lives, and you can see its entire range is fully underneath lithium claims at the moment. And then the Astragalus lentiginosus varieties lives very, very close to this region of chloropyrrole population, so it would be impacted as well. Another issue occurring in the region is geothermal exploration. So geothermal is currently, they're sinking wells and testing and examining the site for geothermal potential, in which there is. It's known to impact groundwater dependent ecosystems, and it has dried springs at other places where geothermal has gone in. And this can lead to extirpation of local wildlife and plants. And as we talked about, the sensitive species, I mean, there's many species that depend on the groundwater, and these are the most sensitive species that would be impacted by the development of geothermal projects in the area. And in addition to this, they create light and noise pollution, which would impact the bat, waterfowl, and migratory bird populations in the region as well. Grazing is another really big issue in the region. And so it disturbs ecosystems through the physical presence of cattle, trampling, introduction of non-native species, fecal deposits, herbivory, contamination of waterways. But it's also a huge issue because rancher alteration and demolition of springs and water sources, as we saw earlier. So not only are the cattle coming in and trampling and eating a lot of the plants, the ranchers are demolishing a lot of the sources, like the springs that support very, very sensitive species. And cattle were observed grazing at almost every spring in the range, even in places where rare species were found. And so you can see here, this is Angelica kingii, which is fairly uncommon, but only known for one location in the Silver Peaks. And when we got to it, we found one flowering plant, but the rest had been grazed to the ground. And you can also see here, cattle grazing in the team's buckwheat critical habitat, not ideal. And then we also have utility scale solar development coming into the region. And so you can see here, this is the study site, a crude boundary of it, and then some of the solar project coming into the study site and extending out into the valley over here. And so this is known as the Esmeralda 7. It's in review right now. It's about 480 square kilometers in the northeast corner of the study site. So this is one of the largest solar projects in proposal at the moment. And it's all proposed within the vicinity of the Greenlink West transmission line, which is the whole reason why they're even proposing to build in this site in the first place. And as we know, utility scale solar development scrapes the ground of all life, industrializes landscapes, and fragments habitat. And these boundaries also overlap in occurrence of the rare and state-listed plant Astragalus lentiginosus varieties, which is state endangered. And climate change will impact all places. So this is not just the Silver Peak Range. Everywhere is vulnerable to this. We know we're going to see increasing temperatures, drier landscapes, reduced precipitation, and reduced snowpack. And this could contribute to more widespread tree death at the peaks, which is likely to be climate-driven in nature. So as I mentioned, when we were in the high peaks and we found the Great Basin bristlecone pines, Pinus longeva, there was a huge stand of dead trees. And so this could likely be due to drought and heat. And this is probably something that we'll be seeing more of in the future as sensitive species are impacted by these rising temperatures. We also have been noticing a lot of increased tree mortality with pinyon pine, Pinus monophila. And so beetle infestation and drought are kind of correlated. And so we're just seeing more prevalence of pinyon death in the region. And then also we have the northernmost extent of the Western Joshua trees occur in the Silver Peak Range. And this is a species that is predicted to undergo widespread range contraction. So as we might lose these species from the southern end of their range in places such as Joshua Tree, the study site could serve as a future climate refugia as it's the northernmost limit of their range. And another thing going on in the range is the introduction of non-native species. So throughout the course of this study, we documented 52 non-native taxa. And so these species, not all of them have aggressive invasive behavior, but some of them have very, very aggressive invasive behavior that threatens native species, especially our rare, most vulnerable or threatened species. These spread rapidly, outcompete small annuals for water and light, and reduce their populations, and also then just reduces the overall area plant and wildlife biodiversity. Less diversity of plants means less pollinators, means less birds coming in to eat those pollinators. So it really just impacts the whole ecosystem, whole ecology of the place. And so these were kind of the main troublemakers in the area. You can see Bromus tectorum is one of the most ubiquitous problematic invasives across the West, but it seems here to stay, but it will just cover landscapes and outcompete a lot of the annuals trying to live there. We also had some plants such as Halogedon glomeratus, which follows almost all road cuts and disturbances. So as we see more exploration into the range, Halogedon just follows where the trucks go. Tumbleweeds just, coming in left and right, kind of like a cartoon. And then we have some salt cedars and some problematic mustards as well. And then I've mentioned is that we have invasive animals in the range as well, such as bullfrogs, which will eat other species such as baby native frogs. So it's like not really great to have bullfrogs in your wetlands because that will really impact the local biodiversity. There's also goldfish there, which I thought was kind of weird, but maybe somebody released them. I don't really know a lot about the goldfish. Feral horses, and then at this point, the cattle in the range function as an invasive species. All of these threats that I just talked about also threaten many culturally important plants that occur in the range. So there's so many culturally important plants there, ranging from medicine plants to craft plants to food plants. And all of these threats that I just mentioned impact all of them. And if the groundwater is impacted in the Fish Lake Valley by the salt marshes and some of the other springs throughout the range, culturally important plants that are groundwater dependent may be extirpated from the site, such as Anomopsis californica or some of the willows. And this threatens indigenous cultural heritage, which, as we heard, has already been severely impacted in the range. So these threats kind of are compounded by over a century of settler violence in the region. The Silver Peak Range is at the forefront of a biodiversity crisis caused by the green energy transition. So this just isn't about one plant or one ecosystem or whether or not one plant should get to stay living on this planet. It's about our general willingness to step up and fight for endangered species and protect sensitive places, especially when confronted by some of these big industrial green energy transitions. The Western deserts are the last large-scale intact ecosystems in the country. We can watch their destruction or we can fight for them. Our inactions and actions will write the future. So with this in mind, we return to thinking about the idea of botanical black holes. How can we work to protect something if we don't even know it exists? This underscores the urgency of botanical collections, because as we discussed earlier, vouchered specimens provide baseline biological data. Baseline biological data can inform management and policy decisions. Vouchered specimens can therefore document biodiversity, maximize protection of that biodiversity, inform appropriate land use, and potentially reduce conflicts between industry and rare plants and ecological communities. And so the area was fairly underdocumented for a very long time. The first botanical collector arrived in the Silver Peaks in 1888 and made one collection of Chloropyron tecopensii. He was a local miner, happened to be in the area collecting plants. And from 1888 to 1978, only 82 collections were made in this whole area. And then in the late 1970s and early 80s, Margaret J. Williams and Arnold Team arrived in the area. And they're very prolific Nevada botanical collectors, and they began to collect more rapidly, made a lot of collections. And then for the next 40 or so years, 753 collections were made in the total time. So 1888 to 2021. A total of 753 collections were made. And this represented 311 minimum rank taxa. And then it's also important to mention that there was about 401 observations on iNaturalist, which is an app that really allows scientists to share data quickly and ID plants and animals. And its rise in popularity makes it important to mention. So 200 and minimum ranked taxa were represented on iNaturalist, with collections backlogged or uploaded from 2013 to 2021. And these collections all were primarily focused on the main road in the site. So this here is a road that cuts across the range called Coyote Road. And so the green are the historical vouchered specimens collected by a botanist, pressed, archived, and then the blue are historical iNaturalist observations, so just photo documented and uploaded. Over the course of the study from 2022 to 2024, 3,308 iNaturalist observations were made, 2,792 vouchered collections were made, and this represented 674 minimum ranked taxa, resulting in 3 state records, 55 county records, so plants unknown for the county previous to this study, and 39 of which were vascular and 16 were non-vascular. 56 of these taxa were of conservation concern, and 52 were non-native species. And so all of the collections made, it's a little zoomed out, but so there's a lot more dots actually in there, like almost 3,000, but they're in yellow, or the collections made during the course of this study. So the top 5 families in the range were Asteraceae, Brassicaceae, Poaceae, Boraginaceae, and Polemoniaceae. And this lightly aligns with Nevada, also the top family being Asteraceae, is one of the most common plant families. And then the top 5 genera were Eriogonum, Astragalus, Bochara, Phacelia, and Cryptantha and Gilia tying for 5th place. 68 bryophyte collections were made, representing 26 minimum ranked taxa. And this was 14 families of bryophytes and 16 species new to Esmeralda County. These were determined by David Torin at the California Academy of Sciences, and then the county records were determined by consulting the Consortium of Bryophyte Herbaria and consulting Jan Knocklinger, who's a prolific Nevada collector and focuses on bryophytes. And so now we'll talk a little bit about the notable collections in the range. So first we have Sclerocactus niensis. This is the Nye County fishhook cactus. It's a critically imperiled cactus. So you can see, you can spot the cactus in this picture, but it is right over here. They're very hard to find when they're not flowering. So we were really excited to find this one. It was known for Esmeralda County, but never in the Silver Peak range. So our find of this plant represented a new population occurrence in a westward range extension. Also, Teneptus graniticus, a critically imperiled aster that was only known for one occurrence on Lone Mountain, also in Esmeralda County, but this was thought to be a single site endemic until we found 3 occurrences in the Silver Peak range. So that was pretty exciting to find that it had a broader distribution than previously known. And it's also a critically imperiled species. Astragalus inyoensis, a critically imperiled milkbatch. And so this was a new occurrence never found in Esmeralda County before. It was known for Nevada for one location in the Groom Range, which is on the test site. But other than that, it's primarily found in Inyo County in California. So it's kind of considered more of a California plant. Astragalus lentigianosus variety sesquimatralis is a critically imperiled variety of milkfish called the Sodaville milkfish. And so before this study, there were only 3 known populations. And then we found 2 more populations in the Fish Lake Valley. It's a state-listed endangered species. So this is a new occurrence and a county record. And then we actually recently had our first inaugural meeting of the Astragalus Appreciation Society, where we found another new occurrence of the plant. Very exciting. Nemocladus inyoensis, a critically imperiled Nemocladus. And so this find was a Nevada state record, an eastward range extension. And so when our crew found this, it was a new population occurrence and never before been found in Nevada, and therefore also a county record. Agarocosma jonesii, also a crowdsourced find, imperiled fern that grows in limestone cracks. So this is also a county record and range extension eastward. The Nevada orchids, a vulnerable special dune tomato. that it was a southeastward range extension and a new population occurrence. So again, this only occurs in sand dunes and doesn't come up every year. So that was a pretty special find. Ivesea arizonica, variety arizonica, a vulnerable Ivesea. So this is a northwestward range extension. This plant typically grows in the Grand Canyon where it does not have petals that look like this. They're typically entire, and so this licineate petal form is very intriguing, and somebody should study it a little further. This is a new population occurrence for the study site. Eriogonum rubicali, which was a southeastward range extension and a county record. It had never been recorded before in Esmeralda County, so this is a new population occurrence. So vulnerable buckwheat, typically restricted to the clay soils around the Lahontan Basin buckwheat, which is not in the Silver Peak range. It's closer to Reno, so this is a pretty big range extension. Nemocladus morfieldii, which is this very cute little Nemocladus. We're always excited to find Nemocladus, they're the best. This is a new population occurrence and a county record, and also as a vulnerable species. Everyone's favorite lupin, the Lilliput lupin, Lupinus unicialis. So this is a southward range extension and a new population occurrence, as well as a county record. And just look at how tiny it is. Look at those little flowers. I love it. It's so great. And then finally, Nemocladus rigidus. So this was known for the range. We knew it was in the study site, and we wanted to relocate this historical collection. And it's really important to find these historical collections because it tells us how plants are continuing to do in the range. So we knew this had been seen in the 80s, but we didn't know if it was still there. And it took a lot of effort, but we found it, and it's so tiny, maybe no bigger than your thumbnail. And so, yeah, that just tells us plants are persisting, plants are hanging on. And so I just wanted to include some snapshots of fieldwork just so you guys could see how nothing ever goes wrong. And it's so easy. And everything is fun all the time. And also some of the humans and animals that came out to the site. And so this past last year's season, we had 6 botany boot camp interns come out, and they got to spend a few weeks in the field learning to make vouchered specimens, like learning to do field work. And then they came to the garden and got to do a rotation to the different departments where they went to the herbarium and the lab and the greenhouses. And so they really got a well-rounded experience to help progress their journey, their botanical journey further. And so that was really great to have all these people out. I also had countless volunteers and some very lovely field assistants that helped me. And yeah, this was really great. Despite all the trucks stuck in crazy places, we had lots of amazing blooms, lots of amazing people. And I just really wanted to take a time to thank everyone that came out to the field, especially my 2 tireless field assistants, Chloe Novak and Dito Kennedy. Thank you so much. And then everyone else who just came out and helped me. I would not have ventured so boldly into the unknown without y'all. All of the boot camp interns, thank you so much for trusting me that just showing up in the range, a stranger, and coming on out and being excited to look at flowers and plants. I really appreciate that. I also wanted to thank some of my early botany mentors, Harpo South, Dave Tank, and Ben Legler. And then a special thank you to my advisor, Naomi Fraga, for supporting me through this and putting up with me and hearing out my crazy ideas. And then also Patrick Donnelly and the Center for Biological Diversity, Arnold Team and Jan Knocklinger for their support and help, and Jim Moorfield, who helped so immensely and essentially annotated thousands of iNaturalist observations and really helped me get to meet and learn the flora of Western Nevada. And then a thank you to all of my funding sources. Also would not have been possible without any one of these sources. And so with that, thank you so much. You can follow the project on iNaturalist. You can reach me at any of these places. And thank you all so much.
Can we have the lights, please? So, we'll take okay, just so everyone knows what's happening. We're gonna take a couple of questions from the audience, and then after that, Peri Lee will convene with their committee, where we'll interrogate Peri